we're going to go on a little history lesson now with the history of internal comms. Now, I appreciate that if you're listening to this, you can't see the notes that are in front of me, but I did do a massive dump of stuff to Chuck and said, I'm not going to read all this, but here's some context, which I know you've enjoyed reading. But a couple of weeks ago, there was a conference in the UK called the History of Internal Comms Conference. It was hosted at Brunel University in London, and it was hosted by Professor Michael Heller, who has been looking at the history of internal comms for the last few years. Now, I was talking about the value of internal comms and how that has shifted over the years, and I shared my speech as an article on LinkedIn. So I'll pop the link to that in the show notes in case anyone's looking at value. But the reason I wanted to talk about it was because as I was sitting in the opening keynote where Professor Heller was talking through the history of internal comms and all these things, I'm going to get my notebook up that I had on the day. So I'm scribbling away. He's talking about, internal comms developed due to change in organizations, changes in the environment, changes in management thinking. There's some really interesting stuff about the first time the first magazine came out, which was like 1878 was the first internal comms magazine. But everything came from workers. So it all came from this need to connect over sport or share information. It came from employees. That was the point, really, and lots of links to education. But as I was sitting in the audience, I wrote in big letters, "This is never going to work," and put a box around it. And then I wrote, "Nobody wants this," underneath. And I had a conversation with someone else in one of the breaks. And I said, I actually left the opening keynote with a realization that when you look at the history of internal comms, so much of it is coming from employees. And so much of the work that I'm doing and we talk about is trying to convince leaders of the benefit of internal comms. But nobody asked for it. Like at no point did a leader say, we need to do this. It all came from employees wanting to talk to each other. It came from this need for social connection. It came from sport. It came from being able to show you were doing your duty as a civilian, all of those things. And there are lots of changes. I'll put a link to the History of Internal Comms website in the show notes, because if you are interested in it, there's quite a lot of stuff documented about what happened, the impact of the First World War, the Second World War, digital. There's loads of stuff in here. But everything that I came back to was the history of internal comms is very clearly about magazines, editorial channels, very heavily union-based in there as well. But there's nothing that says really that a leader decided that, I really need to talk to my people. I need to hear from my people. I need to connect to my people. That doesn't feel like that ever really came up. And that's why I left the beginning feeling a little bit sad. Now, I didn't stay for all the sessions because I had to head home and do some client work. But I wanted to talk about it here because I think it's an interesting topic. And I also am interested in your perspective around, this research is showing that internal comms goes back about 150 years. Is that helpful to know? Does knowing our history help us? Does it hold us back not knowing it? And if we know that we come from social connection and publishing, does it change anything about what we're doing?
I think this should change everything based on your perspective. I'm loving this, Jenny. One of I would say it's a prized possession, I guess. I got this from my mom. It's a newsletter from a company that my grandfather worked at, where it's an employee profile about him in this.
Oh,
I would
nice.
say it's probably from the late 40s, early 1950s, somewhere around there. But I love this intention of that it was from the employees, for the employees. I think that's the focus that we should have. That's the thinking we should have. At no point did the company say, historically speaking, that we know of, hey, we should make sure employees stay informed. No, it was employees wanting to connect. It was employees wanting to learn from each other, know what's going on, all of those things. I mean, it talks about even some of the notes you had in here was especially a lot of this during the war, which I love. This one title, was it Khakis and Comrades?
Yeah.
Or Comrades and Khakis. Sorry, Comrades and Khakis. Like there's a moment, and it's funny you should mention the union side, because there's a lot of, I would say, typically anti-union sentiment out there that I hear from just people in general, but also a lot of communicators. My manufacturing comms background was in union environments. I actually quite enjoyed working in those environments because guess who the union is really all about? The employees. That's the focus. That's what they're there for. It's not for the company leaders and the CEO or their plant manager, whoever it is. So I love this historical aspect to it. In fact, it should give some legacy to the work that we're all doing. And perhaps it might just get you to shift your focus a little bit to saying, who is this for?
Yeah.
And why is it for this group of people?
And I think that was the realization for me, was that it all kind of comes back to the social piece, really. Like, it does say in the research that by the 1930s, nearly every large scale organization had some sort of company journal, but it served very operational roles. It was kind of communication, education, entertainment. And it did have some element of that corporate identity, that culture piece that we often talk about, but it was such a big part of the community element, which is ultimately what magazines, should be. I remember doing magazines when I was in house, and I did a magazine for a cookie brand that I worked for, and it was called Crumbs. And I hated this magazine because it felt really chaotic and it was quite messy, but it was exactly the right thing for employees. And all we talked about was who was designing what cookies and what they were. And there was nothing in there about corporate stuff. And people loved it because it was just about them and cookies, which was great. But I think we get stuck in internal comms of trying to make things very polished and very together. And I fell into that trap in my junior career of, being the brand police, and it has to look like this and it has to be like this. And I just think it feels a bit scrappy. It feels like there were a group of people that just got together and did this, on the side of their job, and then just emailed it round. And now it has become a professional, profession, and that's lovely. Yeah. But I think it's lost something along that in terms of the point of it and what it was here to actually do. And it's become so corporatized, not a word, that it's lost that real people feel to it.
Yeah. I think I used to carry this around with me. I think I've lost it over the years, but it was my favorite example of an employee newsletter. And I can't even remember the name. I can't remember the company, but I do remember they were a catering company. This newsletter was like typed out in Word, basically, gave financial summaries of this is how many orders we had last week, this is how many orders we did this week, this is what last month, this month, last year, like just quick charts for people to look at. One of the things that it would highlight was recognizing employees who are basically like drivers who were driving catering orders around. If they spotted a competitor's van outside a business, they were then instructed to go in and drop off like a menu and a business card, because clearly that customer is buying catering business, so they should buy from us. It was just this very simple, like every communicator was just like clutching their pearls at the design or lack thereof of this thing. But if you're that employee, it delivered exactly what you wanted. It gave you exactly what you needed, and it gave the recognition of saying, hey, this is, or, hey, we just got this business because Jenny dropped this menu off at this thing. And it just told a very basic story to people. Yeah. But I love this fact that employees started it, and what we would now probably call shadow comms. Like we're now like dumping on this thing. And this is actually the history of our profession, of employees doing it in their own circle, which is now something that we denigrate.
Yeah. Maybe we are the shadow comms.
Ooh.
But yeah, I mean, I could talk about this quite a lot, and I am very interested in it. It's really good work in terms of the history, and hearing at a conference that was a blend of academics and professionals, there was something quite lovely about those two parts of what we do kind of coming together.
And I think it's easy to focus on the channels, which I think is more is interesting, but I also think it's limiting. I think it's more important to focus on the intent, because yes, back in the late 1800s, you're not going to email anything. You're not going to post anything on an internet, right? It's going to be print. But that's the history. So let's learn from that. In fact, it would be interesting to know for companies, for communicators at companies who have been around since this time, do you have any kind of archives? Like a lot of these companies do have some element of that. Like go see what you can find out, like, and then republish some of that stuff. Like, because I think that's the stuff that your employees would be really interested in seeing.
Yeah, I've still got my old company magazines from when I was doing them in places, and I had a little trip down memory lane reading them the other day. But I think the last episode we did, I just did like the "That's All, Folks" on the front cover, which was sort of the last one before, you know, digital came over and took it all away.